The golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over the Metropolitan Music Academy's grand ballroom. Tonight was special. The annual fundraising gala brought together the city's most influential people, all dressed in their finest clothes. Wealthy donors, talented students, and respected music teachers filled the elegant space, their conversations creating a gentle buzz of excitement. At the center of it all stood something magnificent, a 1925 Steinway grand piano. Its black surface gleamed under the lights, and its elegant curves seemed to call out to anyone who understood music. This wasn't just any piano. It was a masterpiece, worth more than most people's houses. The piano had quite a story. Mr. Davidson, one of the Academy's biggest supporters, had discovered it in an old mansion he recently bought. The previous owner, a famous composer from decades ago, had left it behind when the family moved away. For years, it sat silent and forgotten in a dusty room. When Mr. Davidson first saw it, he knew it belonged at the Academy. "This beauty needs to be heard again," he had told the director just a week ago. Music should never stay silent, but there was a problem. A big one. The piano looked perfect from the outside, but something was wrong inside. When anyone pressed the keys, nothing happened. No sound came out. It was like trying to speak with no voice. Dr. Williams, the Academy's director, stood up at the front of the room. He was a kind man in his 60s who had dedicated his whole life to music. His eyes sparkled as he looked at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "tonight we have something very special to share with you. This beautiful piano behind me is our newest addition, generously donated by Mr. Davidson." The crowd turned to look at the piano, and several people nodded in appreciation. Even those who didn't know much about music could see its beauty. "But," Dr. Williams continued, raising his hand, "this magnificent instrument has a mystery. For reasons we can't understand, it refuses to make any sound. Our best piano experts have looked at it. Our finest technicians have examined every part, yet it remains silent." A woman in the front row whispered to her husband, "What's the point of a piano that doesn't work?" Dr. Williams smiled. "That's exactly why we're here tonight. I'm announcing a challenge that I hope will solve this puzzle. We're offering a $10,000 reward to anyone who can make this piano sing again." The room buzzed with interest. $10,000 was serious money, and the challenge sounded intriguing. "We've already had 10 of our most skilled pianists try," Dr. Williams explained. "Each one is accomplished, each one talented, each one determined, but so far this piano has defeated them all." He gestured toward a group of people sitting at a special table near the stage. These were the Academy's star performers, people who had played in concert halls around the world, won international competitions, and taught at the highest levels. Tonight they'll try again here in front of all of you. Maybe the piano just needs an audience to inspire it. The first pianist to try was Professor Martinez, a woman who had performed with symphony orchestras across Europe. She wore an elegant blue dress and walked to the piano with confidence. Her students often said she could make any piano sound like heaven. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The room fell completely silent. Everyone leaned forward, waiting to hear beautiful music. Professor Martinez pressed down on middle C. Nothing. She tried a simple scale. Still nothing. The keys moved under her fingers, but no sound came out. It was eerie, like watching someone try to sing with their mouth sewn shut. She tried harder, pressing the keys with more force. She attempted different sections of the keyboard. She even opened the piano lid to check if something was obviously wrong. But no matter what she did, the piano remained stubbornly silent. After 15 minutes, she stood up and shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said to the crowd. "I've never encountered anything like this." The second pianist was James Chun, a jazz musician famous for his creative improvisations. If anyone could coax music from a difficult instrument, it would be him. Jazz musicians were known for making magic happen with whatever they had. James sat down and cracked his knuckles. "Let's see what you've got," he said to the piano, as if it could hear him. He started with a simple blues progression, something that usually worked on any piano. Nothing. He tried different approaches, gentle touches, firm presses, even tapping the keys instead of pressing them. He checked the pedals, thinking maybe they held the secret. But the piano remained as quiet as a library at midnight. "This is impossible," he muttered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. One by one, the other pianists tried. There was Linda, who specialized in classical music and could play Mozart like she was reading a newspaper. There was Robert, whose powerful style could make a piano thunder like a storm. There was young Tommy, barely 25 but already considered a prodigy. Each attempt became more frustrating than the last. The audience watched with growing disappointment as pianist after pianist failed to produce even a single note. Some tried gentle approaches, others used force. Some attempted to find hidden switches or buttons. Others opened up the piano to look at its internal parts. Nothing worked. By the time the eighth pianist gave up, the mood in the room had changed completely. What started as excitement had turned into puzzlement, then frustration, and now something close to embarrassment. "Maybe it's cursed," joked someone from the back of the room, but nobody laughed. The ninth pianist was Dr. Peterson, the Academy's most senior professor. If anyone could solve this mystery, surely it would be him. He had been working with pianos for over 40 years and had seen every problem imaginable. He approached the piano like a detective examining evidence. He checked every visible part, tested every key individually, and even used a small flashlight to peer into the internal mechanisms. The crowd watched hopefully, thinking that experience would triumph where talent had failed, but after 30 minutes of careful examination and gentle attempts to play, even Dr. Peterson had to admit defeat. "I've never seen anything like this," he announced to the crowd. "The piano appears to be in perfect condition, yet it produces no sound whatsoever." The final pianist was Rebecca Morrison, a concert performer who had played for presidents and royalty. She was known for her ability to make any piano sound extraordinary. If she couldn't make it work, nobody could. Rebecca took her time, trying every technique she knew. She played with different pressures, different speeds, different styles. She even tried singing along, hoping that somehow her voice would encourage the piano to join in. But like all the others, she eventually had to stand up and shake her head. In defeat, the room fell into disappointed silence. Dr. Williams looked embarrassed as he returned to the front of the room. The challenge that was supposed to be the highlight of the evening had become its biggest failure. "Well," he said, trying to keep his voice cheerful, "it seems our mystery piano is more mysterious than we thought. Perhaps we'll have to accept that some puzzles aren't meant to be solved tonight." The crowd began to murmur among themselves, some people already reaching for their coats. The gala was supposed to continue with dinner and dancing, but the failed piano challenge had dampened everyone's spirits. Little did anyone know that outside the Academy's tall windows, someone was watching. Someone who understood exactly what was wrong with the beautiful, silent piano. The silence in the room felt heavy after Rebecca Morrison's failed attempt. Dr. Williams stood near the mysterious piano, looking like a man who had promised everyone a magic show but forgot how to do the tricks. The $10,000 reward. Money seemed to mock him from where it sat, untouched and unclaimed. "Perhaps we should move on to dinner," suggested Mrs. Patterson, one of the Academy's board members. She was trying to be helpful, but her voice carried the disappointment everyone felt. But Dr. Williams wasn't ready to give up. He had built his reputation on solving musical problems, and this silent piano was the biggest puzzle he'd ever faced. "Let's try a different approach," he announced to the crowd. "Maybe we need fresh eyes on this challenge." He looked around the room at the hundreds of people gathered for the gala. "Does anyone else want to try? We have students here, teachers from other schools, even some of you who play piano as a hobby. Sometimes the solution comes from the most unexpected place." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. After watching 10 professional pianists fail, who would be brave enough to try? It was like being asked to solve a math problem that had stumped 10 professors. Finally, a young student named Alex raised his hand. He was maybe 19 years old, with nervous energy and the kind of confidence that only comes from not yet knowing how difficult things can be. "I'll try," he said. His voice cracking slightly, Alex walked to the piano with the determined stride of someone who believed youth could triumph where experience had failed. The crowd watched with renewed interest. Maybe this young man would see something the professionals had missed. He sat down and flexed his fingers like a boxer preparing for a fight. Alex had been playing piano since he was 6 years old, and he knew he was good. Not professional level good, but good enough to impress his friends and teachers. He started with something simple, chopsticks, the song every piano student learns. First, his fingers moved confidently across the keys, pressing them with the exact rhythm he'd played thousands of times before. Nothing happened. The keys went down and came back up, but no sound emerged. Alex frowned and tried again, this time pressing harder. He could feel the keys responding under his fingers, could sense the internal mechanisms moving, but still no music came out. "That's weird," he muttered, loud enough for people to hear. He tried a different song, then another. He even attempted to play with just one finger, thinking maybe the problem was with using two. Many keys at once, but the piano remained as silent as a tomb. Alex spent 10 minutes trying everything he could think of. He checked if maybe he was sitting too far away or too close. He adjusted the bench height. He even took off his jacket, thinking maybe he needed to move more freely. Nothing worked, eventually. He stood up and shrugged apologetically. "Sorry, everyone. I thought maybe ... His voice trailed off as he walked back to his seat, looking embarrassed. The crowd's energy dropped even further. If a determined young student couldn't make it work, what hope did anyone else have? But then Mrs. Chun, one of the wealthy donors, surprised everyone by standing up. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and the kind of elegant presence that comes from a lifetime of confidence. "I used to play when I was younger," she announced. "Perhaps this old piano just needs an older touch." People perked up slightly. Mrs. Chun had donated a lot of money to the academy over the years, and everyone respected her. Maybe her gentle approach would succeed where force and technique had failed. She walked slowly to the piano, her cane tapping softly on the polished floor. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt hopeful rather than tense. Mrs. Chun sat down carefully and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers were thin and showed her age, but they moved with the memory of years of practice. She had learned to play in a different era. When piano lessons were considered essential for every young lady, she began with a simple melody, something soft and sweet that might coax the piano into cooperation. Her touch was gentle, almost loving, as if she were trying to wake a sleeping child rather than force a stubborn machine. But gentleness didn't work any better than force had. The keys responded to her touch, moving up and down exactly as they should, but no sound came out. Mrs. Chun tried for several minutes, her frustration growing despite her attempts to hide it. "I don't understand," she said finally. "In my day, pianos always worked if you treated them with respect." She stood up slowly, shaking her head in confusion. The crowd applauded her effort, but the mood was getting darker by the minute. Dr. Williams was starting to sweat despite the air conditioning. This was supposed to be the highlight of the evening, the moment that would get everyone excited about supporting the academy. Instead, it was turning into a public embarrassment. "Anyone else?" he asked, trying to keep hope in his voice. 3 more people tried over the next half hour. There was Mike, a music teacher from a nearby high school who was known for his creative problem-solving. He tried everything from playing individual keys to pressing multiple keys at once, even attempting to play a rhythm on the wooden surface of the piano itself. Then came Susan, a piano tuner who worked at several schools in the city. If anyone understood the mechanical side of pianos, it was her. She spent 20 minutes examining every visible part of the instrument, checking for loose connections, stuck keys, or broken strings. "Everything looks perfect," she announced to the crowd. "All the strings are tight, all the keys move properly, all the pedals work. I can see the hammers moving inside when the keys are pressed, but somehow no sound comes out." The last volunteer was Professor Williams from the university across town. He wasn't related to Dr. Williams, but he was just as passionate about music. He had heard about the challenge and driven over specifically to try his hand at solving the mystery. Professor Williams tried a scientific approach. He tested individual keys, starting from the lowest note and working his way up the entire keyboard. He pressed each key with exactly the same pressure, timing each attempt with his watch. The result was the same for every single key: complete silence. "This defies everything I know about how pianos work," he admitted to the crowd. "The sound should be created when the hammer hits the string. I can see the hammers moving, the strings look fine, but somehow the sound just isn't happening." By now, almost 2 hours had passed since the challenge began. The crowd was restless, and some people were quietly leaving. The elegant gala was turning into a frustrating puzzle that no one could solve. Dr. Williams looked around the room desperately. 13 people had tried to make the piano work. 13 people had failed. The beautiful instrument sat there like a cruel joke, looking perfect but remaining stubbornly silent. "I think we need to accept that this piano has defeated us tonight," he said finally. His voice carried a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment. "Perhaps we'll need to bring in specialists from the piano company itself." Just as he was about to officially end the challenge, a security guard near the windows caught his attention. The guard was gesturing toward something outside, his expression urgent and excited. "Dr. Williams," the guard called out, "I think you need to see this." Everyone turned to look toward the tall windows that faced the street. There, barely visible in the dim light from the street lamps, was a figure standing on the sidewalk. Someone was watching the gala from outside, and from the way they stood, it seemed like they had been there for quite some time. "She's been out there for almost an hour," the security guard explained, "just watching through the windows. And sir, I think she might know something about that piano." The mysterious figure outside would soon change everything, but for now, the beautiful Steinway remained as silent as the day it was found, its secrets locked away like a treasure chest without a key. The security guard's name was Officer Thompson, and in his 15 years of working at the academy, he had seen all kinds of people. Rich donors in fancy cars, nervous students before big performances, famous musicians who acted like they owned the world. But the woman standing outside the windows was different from anyone he'd encountered before. She had been there when he started his evening rounds, just standing on the sidewalk looking through the tall glass windows. At first he thought she might be homeless and planning to ask for money from the well-dressed people inside. That happened sometimes during big events, but something about her posture told a different story. She wasn't looking at the people or their expensive clothes and jewelry. Her eyes were fixed entirely on the piano. She stood perfectly still, like someone watching a movie they couldn't look away from. Officer Thompson had walked over to check on her about an hour ago. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" He had asked through the glass door. The woman turned to look at him, and he was surprised by her eyes. They weren't the desperate eyes of someone looking for handouts or the angry eyes of someone causing trouble. They were focused, intelligent, and filled with something he couldn't quite identify. Maybe sadness, maybe longing. "I'm just watching," she had said quietly. "Is that okay?" Her voice was calm and educated, not what he expected from someone wearing old, worn-out clothes and carrying everything she owned in a backpack that had seen better days. "The academy is having a private event tonight," Officer Thompson explained. "You can't come inside without an invitation." "I know," she replied. "I'm not trying to get in, I just ... I recognized that piano. That caught his attention. "You recognize it? It's a 1925 Steinway Model M," she said without hesitation. "Probably made in the Hamburg factory, based on the leg design. Beautiful instrument. Worth about $200,000 if it's in good condition." Officer Thompson stared at her. He didn't know much about pianos, but he knew enough to realize that most people couldn't identify a specific model from this distance, especially through windows and with all the people blocking the view. "How do you know so much about pianos?" he asked. "I used to work with them," she said simply, then turned back to watching through the window. That conversation had happened an hour ago, and she hadn't moved since. Officer Thompson found himself checking on her every few minutes during his rounds. There was something compelling about her quiet presence, the way she watched the piano like she was waiting for something to happen. When he saw the 13th person fail to make the piano work and watched Dr. Williams's increasing desperation, Officer Thompson made a decision that would surprise even himself. "Dr. Williams," he called out, walking quickly toward the front of the room, "I think you need to see this." Dr. Williams looked exhausted and embarrassed, but he followed Officer Thompson toward the windows. The crowd, sensing something different was happening, began to quiet down and pay attention. "There's a woman outside," Officer Thompson explained as they reached the windows. "She's been watching for over an hour, and she says she recognizes the piano. She knew exactly what model it was, even from out here." Dr. Williams pressed his face against the glass, trying to see through the reflections from the lights inside. There she was, a woman probably in her 50s, standing perfectly still despite the cool evening air. Her clothes were clearly old and had been worn many times. Her backpack looked like it contained everything she owned. "She looks homeless," Dr. Williams said, not unkindly but with obvious confusion. "That's what I thought too," Officer Thompson admitted. "But sir, she knows things about pianos, technical things. She identified this specific model from way out there, and she was right. I checked with Professor Martinez. It is a 1925 Steinway Model M. Dr. Williams studied the woman more carefully. Something about the way she stood, the way she held herself, didn't match her appearance. There was a dignity there, a confidence that seemed out of place with her circumstances." "What did she say about recognizing it?" Dr. Williams asked. "That's all she would tell me." "But sir, look at how she's watching. That's not just curiosity. She's studying it like she's trying to figure something out." The crowd had noticed the conversation at the windows and was starting to gather around. Mrs. Patterson, the board member, looked skeptical. "Surely you're not considering asking a homeless person to try the piano after all our professionals have failed." But Dr. Williams was thinking. In his 30 years at the academy, he had learned that musical knowledge could come from the most unexpected places. Some of his best students had grown up without money but with an incredible understanding of music. Some of his worst students were rich kids who could afford the best lessons but had no real feeling for the art. "Officer Thompson," he said slowly, "ask her if she'd like to come inside." The room erupted in whispers. Some people looked curious. Others seemed shocked that anyone would invite a homeless person into their elegant gala. Mrs. Patterson looked like she might faint. "Dr. Williams," she hissed quietly, "think about what you're doing. This is a formal event with very important donors. We can't just invite random people off the street." But Dr. Williams had made up his mind. "Music doesn't care about money or social status," he said firmly. "If this woman knows something about our piano, I want to hear it." Officer Thompson walked outside, feeling nervous about the conversation he was about to have. The woman was still standing in exactly the same spot, her eyes still fixed on the piano inside. "Ma'am," he said gently, "would you like to come inside and take a look at that piano?" She turned to him with surprise. "Inside? Me?" "The director wants to talk to you about what you know." For the first time since he'd been watching her, the woman seemed uncertain. She looked down at her worn clothes, then back at the elegant scene inside the academy. "I don't exactly fit in with that crowd," she said quietly. "The director doesn't care about that," Officer Thompson assured her. "He just wants to solve the mystery of why that piano won't work." The woman was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking hard about the decision. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll come in, but I'm not promising anything." As Officer Thompson led her toward the entrance, the woman paused and looked back at the piano one more time. "Poor thing," she murmured, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. Sitting there, beautiful and silent, just waiting for someone to understand. Inside the academy, Dr. Williams was trying to calm the nervous crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to welcome someone who might be able to help us with our piano mystery. I ask that you treat our guest with the same respect you'd show any expert we brought in to solve this problem." The large doors opened, and Officer Thompson walked in with the woman beside him. The contrast was striking, the elegantly dressed crowd with their jewelry and perfect hair, and this quiet woman with her simple clothes and weathered backpack. But as she walked toward the piano, something changed about her. Her back straightened slightly, her steps became more confident, and her eyes grew bright with something that looked almost like excitement. She approached the beautiful Steinway like someone greeting an old friend they hadn't seen in years. The crowd watched in fascination as she stopped a few feet away from the instrument and just stood there, studying it with a kind of intense focus that spoke of deep knowledge. "Hello, beautiful," she whispered to the piano, and several people in the front row heard her. "Let's see what's been keeping you quiet." The mystery was about to be solved, but not in the way anyone expected. The woman stood in front of the piano like she was meeting an old friend after many years apart. The elegant crowd watched her every move, some curious, others clearly uncomfortable with having someone so different in their fancy event. She didn't seem to notice the stares or whispers. Her full attention was on the beautiful instrument in front of her. Slowly, she walked around the piano, examining it from every angle. Her movements were careful and deliberate, like a doctor checking a patient. "May I touch it?" she asked Dr. Williams politely. He nodded, still not sure what to expect, but hoping for any kind of breakthrough after the evening's failures. The woman gently placed her hands on the piano's surface, running her fingers along the smooth black finish. She wasn't just touching it randomly, she was feeling for something specific. Her fingers traced the edges, checked the corners, and examined places that looked perfectly normal to everyone else. "Beautiful craftsmanship," she murmured, talking more to herself than to the crowd. "They don't make them like this anymore." She walked to the side of the piano and lifted the heavy lid that covered the strings and internal mechanisms. The crowd pressed closer, trying to see what she was looking at. Inside the piano, hundreds of strings stretched across a golden frame, and wooden hammers waited to strike them when keys were pressed. The woman pulled a small flashlight from her backpack, the kind that workers carry for looking into dark spaces. She shined it into different parts of the piano's interior, examining areas that the previous 13 people had never thought to check. "Interesting," she said quietly. Dr. Williams couldn't stand the suspense any longer. "Do you see something wrong?" The woman looked up from her examination. "Not wrong exactly, but I think I know what's happening here." She pointed her flashlight toward a specific area inside the piano. "See this mechanism here? This is called the damper system. It's what controls whether the strings can vibrate freely to make sound." Most of the crowd had no idea what she was talking about, but they listened carefully anyway. Professor Martinez, one of the pianists who had failed earlier, stepped closer to get a better look. "In a normal piano," the woman continued, "when you press a key, two things happen. First, a hammer hits the string to make it vibrate. Second, the damper lifts off the string so it can vibrate freely and create sound." She demonstrated by pressing one of the keys gently. Everyone could see. The hammer inside moved toward the string, just like it had for all the previous attempts. "The hammers are working perfectly," she explained. "That's why everyone thought the piano should be making sound. But look here." She pointed to a different part of the mechanism with her flashlight. "The dampers aren't lifting properly. They're staying pressed against the strings, which stops the vibration before it can create any sound. It's like trying to ring a bell while holding your hand against it." The crowd murmured with interest. Finally, someone was explaining what had seemed impossible to understand. "But why would the dampers stick like that?" asked Professor Martinez. The woman smiled slightly, the first smile anyone had seen from her all evening. "This is where knowing old pianos comes in handy. This particular model, the 1925 Steinway Model M, has a specific weakness. The damper spring tension mechanism can shift over time, especially if the piano has been moved or stored in certain conditions." She reached into her backpack again and pulled out a small tool that looked like a thin metal rod with a curved end. "I always carry a few basic tools," she explained. "Old habits." Dr. Williams looked nervous. "Are you sure you should be doing this?" This piano is worth a fortune. I understand your concern, the woman said calmly. But this is a very simple adjustment. I'm not taking anything apart or making permanent changes. I'm just repositioning a spring that's gotten out of place. She looked around at the crowd. Actually, maybe someone should record this in case anyone wants to know how it was fixed. Several people immediately pulled out their phones. The idea of documenting the solution to their expensive mystery seemed like a good one. The woman carefully inserted her tool into a specific spot inside the piano. The spring mechanism is right here, she explained as she worked. In newer pianos, this is designed differently, but these 1925 models have this particular setup. She made a tiny adjustment with her tool, moving something that was completely invisible to everyone watching. There, she said, that should do it. She put her tool away and stepped back from the piano. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if her simple fix had solved what 30 other people couldn't figure out. Would you like to try playing it? Dr. Williams asked. The woman shook her head. Actually, I think one of your pianists should test it first. They'll know immediately if it's working properly. Professor Martinez stepped forward eagerly. She had been the first to fail earlier in the evening, and she was curious to see if this mysterious woman had really solved the puzzle. She sat down at the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys, just like she had hours earlier. The room fell completely silent. Everyone leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. Professor Martinez pressed middle C A perfect. Clear note rang out through the room. The sound was so unexpected after hours of silence that several people actually jumped. Then the room erupted in gasps and excited chatter. It works! Someone shouted. Professor Martinez quickly played a scale, then a simple melody. Every note was crystal clear and beautiful. The piano sounded exactly like a Steinway should, rich, powerful, and perfectly tuned. How did you know how to fix that? Dr. Williams asked the woman, his voice full of amazement. The woman looked a little embarrassed by all the attention. I used to work as a piano technician, she said simply. I've seen this exact problem before, probably a dozen times over the years. Where did you work? Asked Mrs. Patterson, who had been one of the most skeptical about letting the woman inside. Different places, the woman replied, clearly not wanting to give too many details about her past. Music stores, concert halls, private collectors, anywhere pianos needed fixing. Professor Martinez was still playing, testing different keys and combinations. This is incredible, she announced to the crowd. It sounds perfect. Better than perfect, actually, the woman smiled again. That's because it's been waiting to be played for so long. Sometimes instruments sound extra beautiful when they finally get to do what they were made for. Dr. Williams looked at the woman with new respect. I owe you an apology, he said. I almost didn't let you try because of how you look. No apology needed, the woman replied. I know how I appear to people. I've been living rough for a while now. But knowledge doesn't disappear just because your circumstances change. The crowd was buzzing with excitement and curiosity. Here was someone who had solved their impossible problem with a simple adjustment that took less than 5 minutes. Someone who clearly knew more about pianos than most of the professionals in the room, but who was she really? How had someone with such obvious expertise ended up homeless on the streets? And most importantly, what was her story? Young Alex, the student who had tried to play earlier, raised his hand like he was in class. Could you show us how to play something on it? Since you fixed it and everything? The woman looked at the piano, then back at the eager faces in the crowd. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a mixture of longing and fear, like someone being offered something they wanted desperately, but weren't sure they deserved. I don't know, she said softly. It's been a very long time since I've played in front of people. But the crowd was already encouraging her, and Dr. Williams was nodding enthusiastically. After solving their mystery so easily, everyone was curious to see what other surprises this unexpected expert might have in store. The woman stood looking at the piano, her face showing a mix of emotions that was hard to read. The crowd waited quietly, sensing that something important was about to happen. Dr. Williams could see her internal struggle. Part of her clearly wanted to play, but another part seemed afraid. "Take your time," he said gently. "There's no pressure." She walked slowly toward the piano bench, her weathered fingers trailing along the smooth surface of the instrument. "I haven't played for other people in almost 8 years," she admitted. Quietly, Professor Martinez, who was still sitting at the bench testing different keys, immediately stood up. "Please," she said, gesturing to the seat, "I'd be honored to hear you play." The woman sat down carefully, as if the bench might break under her. She adjusted her position slightly, then placed her hands above the keys without touching them. Her posture changed completely, her back straightened, her shoulders relaxed, and her hands formed the perfect curved shape that every piano teacher tries to get their students to achieve. "What would you like me to play?" she asked the crowd. "Whatever you want," called out Alex, the young student. "Something that shows off how good the piano sounds now." The woman was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she smiled, not the small, careful smile she'd shown before, but a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I think I'll play something that this piano was made to handle," she said. "Something from when it was young." She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, a simple melody that could have been a lullaby. But as the music continued, it began to grow more complex, more beautiful, more powerful. The crowd recognized the piece immediately. It was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging and beloved pieces in all of classical music. But this wasn't the simplified version that students sometimes attempted. This was the full, professional-level piece that only the most skilled pianists could play properly. The woman's fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was shaped with incredible skill and emotion. The music filled the entire room, seeming to come not just from the piano, but from everywhere at once. People who had been standing sat down without realizing it. Conversations stopped completely. Even the staff members who were supposed to be working the event found themselves stopping to listen. The music was more than just technically perfect. It was deeply emotional. The woman played like she was telling a story, like every note meant something personal and important. Some people in the crowd felt tears coming to their eyes without understanding exactly why. Mrs. Patterson, who had been the most skeptical about letting a homeless woman into their elegant event, found herself completely mesmerized. She had heard this piece performed by famous pianists in concert halls around the world, but she had never heard it played with such raw emotion and skill. As the music continued, the woman seemed to transform. The tired, uncertain person who had been standing outside the building was gone. In her place was someone who belonged at that piano, someone who had been born to create music like this. Young, Alex watched her hands move and realized he was seeing something he might never see again. This wasn't just good playing. This was the kind of performance that people remembered for the rest of their lives. Dr. Williams stood frozen, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. In his 30 years at the Academy, he had heard thousands of performances. He had listened to world-famous concert pianists, promising young students, and everyone in between. But this was something special, something that went beyond normal categories of good and bad. The security guard who had first talked to the woman was standing near the back of the room, shaking his head in amazement. When he had seen her outside, he had thought she might know something about pianos. He never imagined she could play like this. As the piece reached its most challenging section, the woman's playing became even more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The melody soared and dipped, creating emotions that words couldn't describe. Professor Martinez, who had struggled with this same piece for years before mastering it, watched in awe. The woman wasn't just playing the notes correctly, she was finding things in the music that Professor Martinez had never noticed, bringing out subtleties and emotions that made the familiar piece sound completely new. The piano itself seemed to come alive under her touch. Every note rang out clear and pure, the sound filling not just the room but seeming to touch something deep inside everyone who heard it. This was what the beautiful 1925 Steinway had been made for, not to sit silent and admired, but to create. Music that could move people's hearts. As the piece moved toward its famous, powerful ending, the woman's playing became even more passionate. She swayed slightly with the music, her whole body involved in creating the sounds that poured from the piano. The final notes rang out through the room and then slowly faded into silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of the music that had just ended, full of the emotions that everyone had just experienced. Then the applause began. It started slowly, with one person clapping, then another, then suddenly the entire room erupted in the loudest, most enthusiastic applause any of them had ever given. People were standing, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The woman sat at the piano bench, looking surprised by the reaction. She seemed almost confused by the applause, like she had forgotten that other people were even in the room while she was playing. "That was incredible," Dr. Williams said, his voice shaky with emotion. "Absolutely incredible. Where did you learn to play like that?" The woman's confident posture for moments before began to fade. The shy, uncertain person started to return. "I studied music for many years," she said quietly, "a long time ago." "Where did you study?" asked Professor Martinez. "Which conservatory? Which teachers?" But the woman just shook her head. "That's all in the past now. It doesn't matter anymore." "It absolutely matters," Dr. Williams said firmly. "Someone with your skill level doesn't just disappear from the music world. What happened? Why are you ... He stopped himself before finishing the question, but everyone knew what he was asking. Why was someone who could play like that living? On the streets? The woman stood up from the piano bench, and for a moment it looked like she might just walk away without explaining anything. The crowd waited, hoping she would share her story but not wanting to push too hard. Finally, she spoke. "Life doesn't always go the way you plan," she said simply. "Sometimes things happen that change everything, but music ... Music never leaves you. Even when everything else is gone, the music stays." She looked around at all the faces staring at her with curiosity and respect. These people had gone from seeing her as an unwelcome stranger to recognizing her as someone truly special. But she still seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "I should probably go," she said quietly. "Thank you for letting me fix your piano. And thank you for letting me play it one more time." But Dr. Williams wasn't about to let her just walk away into the night. Not after what they had all just witnessed. Dr. Williams stepped forward as the woman started to gather her worn backpack. "Please, wait," he said gently. "Don't leave just yet. We need to talk." The woman paused, looking uncertain again. The confidence she had shown while playing was already fading, replaced by the careful wariness of someone who had learned not to trust too easily. "There's really nothing more to say," she replied quietly. "I fixed your piano, I played a song, and now I should go. That's how these things work." But the crowd wasn't ready to let her disappear back into the night. They had just witnessed something extraordinary, and everyone could sense there was much more to this woman's story. "That wasn't just playing a song," said Professor Martinez, her voice full of emotion. "That was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard. You can't just walk away like nothing happened." The security guard who had first talked to her outside stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. You said you used to work with pianos, but you didn't mention that you could play like that. That kind of skill doesn't come from just fixing instruments." The woman sighed deeply, like someone who was tired of carrying a heavy secret. She looked around at all the faces watching her with curiosity and concern, and something in her seemed to give way. "You really want to know?" she asked. "Fine, but don't expect a happy story." She set her backpack down and sat on the edge of the piano bench, no longer looking like she was ready to run. The room fell completely silent as everyone waited for her to speak. "My name is Catherine," she began, and it was the first time all evening that she had offered any personal information about herself. 25 years ago, I was a different person living a different life. She paused, looking down at her hands, the same hands that had just created such beautiful music. I graduated from the New England Conservatory with highest honors. I had a promising career as a concert pianist. I played with orchestras, gave solo recitals, taught master classes at prestigious schools. The crowd exchanged glances. This explained so much about what they had just witnessed. But it also raised new questions about how someone with such a background had ended up homeless. I was married to another musician, Catherine continued. A violinist named David. We met in graduate school and thought we had everything figured out. We were going to travel the world making music together, maybe start a family, build a life around the thing we both loved most. Her voice became quieter, more strained. For about 10 years, everything went according to plan. We performed together, taught together, were happy together. I thought that was how life would always be. Dr. Williams could see that this was difficult for her to talk about, but he also sensed that she needed to tell this story maybe for the first time in years. "What happened?" asked young Alex, his voice gentle and curious. Catherine took a deep breath. "David got sick, cancer. It started small. Just some fatigue and minor symptoms that we thought were from too much traveling and performing. By the time we realized how serious it was, the disease had already spread. The room was so quiet that you could hear the air conditioning humming. Everyone was hanging on every word, understanding that they were hearing something deeply personal and painful. The medical bills started piling up fast," Catherine continued. "Really fast. We had some insurance, but not nearly enough for the kind of treatment David needed. We sold our apartment, our instruments, everything we owned that had any value." She gestured toward the beautiful piano. "I had a Steinway Baby Grand, not as nice as this one, but still worth a lot of money. Selling it was like selling a piece of my soul, but we needed every dollar for David's treatment." Mrs. Patterson, who had been so skeptical earlier, now had tears in her eyes. She was beginning to understand the tragedy that had led this talented woman to her current situation. "I stopped performing to take care of David full-time," Catherine said. "I couldn't travel for concerts when he needed me at home. I couldn't focus on teaching when I was spending every day at hospitals and doctor appointments. My career just stopped." "How long were you taking care of him?" asked Professor Martinez softly. 3 years, Catherine replied. 3 years of fighting the disease, trying experimental treatments, hoping for miracles that never came. David was brave through all of it. He kept telling me that when he got better, we'd buy new instruments and start over. He made me promise I wouldn't give up on music, no matter what happened. The security guard found himself wiping his eyes. He had seen a lot of difficult situations in his job, but hearing this woman's story was affecting him more than he expected. "David died on a Tuesday morning in March," Catherine said, her voice becoming very quiet. "I was holding his hand when it happened. The last thing he said to me was, 'Keep playing, Catherine. Promise me you'll keep playing.'" She was silent for a long moment, lost in the memory. When she continued, her voice was stronger but sadder. "After David died, I discovered that even with all the money we'd spent, there were still enormous medical debts left over. The hospital, the doctors, the specialists, they all wanted to be paid. I lost our remaining savings, then our car, then the little apartment we'd been renting. Couldn't your family help?" asked Dr. Williams, "or other musicians you knew?" Catherine shook her head. "My parents had died years earlier. David's family blamed me for not taking better care of him, which was ridiculous but painful anyway. As for other musicians, well, the classical music world is smaller than you might think. When someone disappears from performing for several years, people forget about you pretty quickly." "You tried to get back into music after David died?" asked Alex. "I tried," Catherine admitted, "but I've been away from performing for so long that my skills had gotten rusty. And honestly, every time I sat down at a piano, all I could think about was David and everything we'd lost. The music that used to bring me joy just reminded me of pain." She looked around at the elegant room full of well-dressed people. I ended up working whatever jobs I could find, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, washing dishes in restaurants. Nothing that paid enough to get back on my feet, but enough to survive day by day. How did you end up homeless? Mrs. Patterson asked gently. Bad luck and worse decisions, Catherine said with a bitter smile. I got sick myself, nothing life-threatening, but enough to miss work for a few weeks. Lost my job, couldn't pay rent, got evicted. Once you're on the streets, it's incredibly hard to get back to normal life. You can't get a job without an address, can't get an apartment without a job. She gestured to her worn clothes and old backpack. So here I am. I've been living in shelters and on the streets for about 2 years now. I kept those piano tools because they're small, and sometimes I could make a few dollars fixing instruments for people. But I hadn't played a real piano in front of anyone since David's funeral. The room was completely silent as everyone absorbed her story. Here was someone who had gone from the heights of musical success to living on the streets, not because of drugs or mental illness or poor choices, but because life had thrown her a series of devastating blows that she couldn't recover from. Why did you decide to come inside tonight? Dr. Williams asked. You could have just walked away. Catherine looked at the piano, then back at the crowd. Because when I saw this beautiful instrument sitting there silent and broken, I recognized something in it, something that reminded me of myself. Catherine's words hung in the air like the last notes of a beautiful song. The comparison between herself and the broken piano struck everyone in the room deeply. Here was someone who, like the instrument, had been damaged by circumstances, but still held incredible beauty and value inside. Dr. Williams was the first to break the emotional silence. Catherine, he said, his voice thick with feeling, what you've just shared with us. I can't imagine going through something so difficult. But I need you to know something important. He stepped closer to where she sat on the piano bench. Tonight you didn't just fix our piano, you reminded all of us why music matters. That performance you just gave, it was one of the most moving things I've ever heard in my 30 years at this academy. The crowd murmured in agreement. People were wiping their eyes, still processing both the beautiful music they had heard and the tragic story behind it. I have a question, Dr. Williams continued. You said David made you promise to keep playing? When you performed tonight, were you keeping that promise? Catherine looked down at her hands, then back up at him. I think maybe I was. For the first time in years, when I was playing just now, I felt like David was there with me. Not in a sad way, but in a way that felt right, like he was happy I was finally making music again. Mrs. Patterson, who had completely changed her opinion about Catherine over the course of the evening, stepped forward. My dear, I owe you an enormous apology. When I first saw you tonight, I made judgments based on your appearance. I was completely wrong, and I'm ashamed of myself. You don't need to apologize, Catherine said gently. I know how I look. People make assumptions about homeless folks all the time. Usually they're just protecting themselves. But that's exactly the problem, Mrs. Patterson insisted. We see someone who looks different from us and we assume we know their whole story. You've taught me an important lesson tonight about not judging people by their circumstances. Young. Alex raised his hand like he was in class. Catherine, can I ask you something? Do you think you might want to start playing music again? Like, really playing again? Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. Tonight felt good, she admitted. Really good. Better than I felt about music in years. But I don't know if I could handle the pressure of performing professionally again. And honestly, I don't even know where I'd start. That's when Dr. Williams got an idea. He had been thinking since Catherine finished playing, trying to figure out how to help someone with such obvious talent but such difficult circumstances. Catherine, he said slowly, what if I told you that we've been looking for someone with exactly your skills? Someone who understands both the technical and artistic sides of piano music? She looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean? We need a piano technician here at the academy, Dr. Williams explained. Someone who can maintain our instruments, tune them, fix problems when they arise. But we also need someone who can help our students understand what it really means to make music, not just play notes correctly. Professor Martinez's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Catherine, you could teach our advanced students not just technique, but how to put real emotion into their playing. What you did tonight, that's what we've been trying to teach them for years. Catherine shook her head. I appreciate the thought, but I can't teach anymore. I told you I've been away from music too long. My skills aren't what they used to be. Are you kidding? Said the security guard from the back of the room. Lady, I don't know much about classical music, but what you just played sounded pretty amazing to me. Several people in the crowd nodded and called out their agreement. Catherine had clearly impressed everyone in the room, not just with her technical skill, but with the deep emotion she had brought to the music. Besides, Dr. Williams continued, you just diagnosed and fixed a problem that stumped 10 professional pianists and several experienced technicians. Your technical knowledge is obviously still excellent. Catherine looked around at all the faces, watching her hopefully. These people, who had started the evening as strangers, were now offering her something she hadn't dared to dream about in years, a chance to return to the world of music. I don't have anywhere to live, she said quietly. I can't show up to work at a fancy academy looking like this, smelling like I've been sleeping in shelters. That's the easiest problem to solve, said Mrs. Patterson immediately. The academy has a small apartment above the maintenance building. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private. We'd been saving it for the right person. And as for clothes and getting back on your feet, added another board member, we can advance you some. Money from your salary to get what you need. Consider it an investment in our future piano technician. Dr. Williams could see that Catherine was overwhelmed by all the offers of help. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently. Why don't you think about it tonight? We can talk more tomorrow if you're interested. But Catherine was shaking her head. And for a moment, Dr. Williams worried that she was going to refuse their help and disappear back into the night. I can't take charity, she said firmly. I've been down that road before, and it never works out well. People start to think they own you when they help you too much. This isn't charity, Dr. Williams said quickly. This is a job offer. A real job with real responsibilities and a real salary. We need someone with your skills, and tonight you've proven that you're exactly what we've been looking for. He's right, said Professor Martinez. We've been trying to find the right person for months. Someone who understands both the technical and artistic sides of piano music is incredibly rare. What happened tonight wasn't luck. It was expertise meeting opportunity. Catherine stood up from the piano bench and walked over to the window where she had been standing outside just a few hours earlier. She looked out at the dark street, then back at the warm, bright room full of people who were offering her a new beginning. If I said yes, she said slowly, it would have to be understood that I'm not the same pianist I used to be. I might never perform in concert halls again. I might never be comfortable with big audiences. That's perfectly fine, Dr. Williams assured her. What we're offering is a chance to be around music again, to work with instruments you love, and to share your knowledge with students who need what you have to teach. Nothing more complicated than that. Catherine was quiet for a long time, thinking. Everyone in the room waited patiently, understanding that this was a huge decision for someone who had been hurt so badly by life's circumstances. Finally, she turned back to face the crowd. David always said that when one door closes, you have to look for the windows that might be opening. Tonight, I think maybe I found one of those windows. She walked back to the piano and placed her hand on its smooth surface. If you're serious about this job offer, then yes, I'd like to try. For David and for myself and for this beautiful piano that brought us all together tonight. The room erupted in applause for the second time that evening, but this applause was different from the first. This wasn't just appreciation for beautiful music. This was celebration of a human being getting a second chance at life. Catherine's words hung in the air like the last notes of a beautiful song. The comparison between herself and the broken piano struck everyone in the room deeply. Here was someone who, like the instrument, had been damaged by circumstances, but still held incredible beauty and value inside. Dr. Williams was the first to break the emotional silence. "Catherine," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "what you've just shared with us. I can't imagine going through something so difficult. But I need you to know something important." He stepped closer to where she sat on the piano bench. "Tonight, you didn't just fix our piano, you reminded all of us why music matters. That performance you just gave, it was one of the most moving things I've ever heard in my 30 years at this academy." The crowd murmured in agreement. People were wiping their eyes, still processing both the beautiful music they had heard and the tragic story behind it. "I have a question," Dr. Williams continued. "You said David made you promise to keep playing. When you performed tonight, were you keeping that promise?" Catherine looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I think maybe I was. For the first time in years, when I was playing just now, I felt like David was there with me. Not in a sad way, but in a way that felt right, like he was happy I was finally making music again." Mrs. Patterson, who had completely changed her opinion about Catherine over the course of the evening, stepped forward. "My dear, I owe you an enormous apology. When I first saw you tonight, I made judgments based on your appearance. I was completely wrong, and I'm ashamed of myself." "You don't need to apologize," Catherine said gently. "I know how I look. People make assumptions about homeless folks all the time. Usually they're just protecting themselves." "But that's exactly the problem," Mrs. Patterson insisted. "We see someone who looks different from us and we assume we know their whole story. You've taught me an important lesson tonight about not judging people by their circumstances." "Young." Alex raised his hand like he was in class. "Catherine, can I ask you something? Do you think you might want to start playing music again? Like, really playing again?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Tonight felt good," she admitted. "Really good. Better than I've felt about music in years. But I don't know if I could handle the pressure of performing professionally again. And honestly, I don't even know where I'd start." That's when Dr. Williams got an idea. He had been thinking since Catherine finished playing, trying to figure out how to help someone with such obvious talent but such difficult circumstances. "Catherine," he said slowly, "what if I told you that we've been looking for someone with exactly your skills? Someone who understands both the technical and artistic sides of piano music?" She looked at him suspiciously. "What do you mean?" "We need a piano technician here at the academy," Dr. Williams explained. "Someone who can maintain our instruments, tune them, fix problems when they arise. But we also need someone who can help our students understand what it really means to make music, not just play notes correctly." Professor Martinez's eyes lit up. "That's perfect. Catherine, you could teach our advanced students not just technique, but how to put real emotion into their playing. What you did tonight, that's what we've been trying to teach them for years." Catherine shook her head. "I appreciate the thought, but I can't teach anymore. I told you I've been away from music too long. My skills aren't what they used to be." "Are you kidding?" said the security guard from the back of the room. "Lady, I don't know much about classical music, but what you just played sounded pretty amazing to me." Several people in the crowd nodded and called out their agreement. Catherine had clearly impressed everyone in the room, not just with her technical skill, but with the deep emotion she had brought to the music. "Besides," Dr. Williams continued, "you just diagnosed and fixed a problem that stumped 10 professional pianists and several experienced technicians. Your technical knowledge is obviously still excellent." Catherine looked around at all the faces, watching her hopefully. These people, who had started the evening as strangers, were now offering her something she hadn't dared to dream about in years, a chance to return to the world of music. "I don't have anywhere to live," she said quietly. "I can't show up to work at a fancy academy looking like this, smelling like I've been sleeping in shelters." "That's the easiest problem to solve," said Mrs. Patterson immediately. "The academy has a small apartment above the maintenance building. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private. We've been saving it for the right person. And as for clothes and getting back on your feet, added another board member, we can advance you some. Money from your salary to get what you need? Consider it an investment in our future piano technician. Dr. Williams could see that Catherine was overwhelmed by all the offers of help. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently. Why don't you think about it tonight? We can talk. More tomorrow if you're interested. But Catherine was shaking her head. And for a moment Dr. Williams worried that she was going to refuse their help and disappear back into the night. I can't take charity, she said firmly. I've been down that road before, and it never works out well. People start to think they own you when they help you too much. This isn't charity, Dr. Williams said quickly. This is a job offer. A real job with real responsibilities and a real salary. We need someone with your skills, and tonight you've proven that you're exactly what we've been looking for. He's right, said Professor Martinez. We've been trying to find the right person for months. Someone who understands both the technical and artistic sides of piano music is incredibly rare. What happened tonight wasn't luck, it was expertise meeting opportunity. Catherine stood up from the piano bench and walked over to the window where she had been standing outside just a few hours earlier. She looked out at the dark street, then back at the warm, bright room full of people who were offering her a new beginning. If I said yes, she said slowly, it would have to be understood that I'm not the same pianist I used to be. I might never perform in concert halls again. I might never be comfortable with big audiences. That's perfectly fine, Dr. Williams assured her. What we're offering is a chance to be around music again, to work with instruments you love, and to share your knowledge with students who need what you have to teach. Nothing more complicated than that. Catherine was quiet for a long time. Thinking, everyone in the room waited patiently, understanding that this was a huge decision for someone who had been hurt so badly by life's circumstances. Finally, she turned back to face the crowd. David always said that when one door closes, you have to look for the windows that might be opening. Tonight, I think maybe I found one of those windows. She walked back to the piano and placed her hand on its smooth surface. If you're serious about this job offer, then yes, I'd like to try. For David, and for myself, and for this beautiful piano that brought us all together tonight. The room erupted in applause for the second time that evening, but this applause was different from the first. This wasn't just appreciation for beautiful music. This was celebration of a human being getting a second chance at life.